Hello, my name's Shane Hunter, and I have recently been nominated for Patriot of the Year by anti-fascist, far left-wing blogger Slackbastard. I've been lumped in a category with people who do things like this.
Refugees, they just left a busload of refugees.
They're all rapists, don't let them in! Don't let them in, they're
And a guy who is currently going through court for allegedly making a bomb to carry out an attack on some left-wingers. Now, I tend to identify as centre-left myself, so I find it strange that I'm in this category. But the reason the radical left-wingers have put me in this poll is because I used to be an Antifa organiser, and then I came to my senses and I realised that their methods of using violence, the threat of violence and censorship is wrong and actually encourages the radical right-wingers. And now I believe in freedom of speech and debate. More recently, I have given interviews about my experiences, which has really pissed off the radical left-wingers. The winner of this poll will be announced on Triple J's OzzFest during Australia Day. The radical left-wingers think it's going to embarrass me. I think it's going to backfire on these fuckers big time. But I still think I should win this nomination, and this video are the 5 reasons why I believe I should win the nomination of Patriot of the Year. Such as judging people by their individual merits rather than their group identity, advocating against simplistic ideological narratives, advocating against violence and for freedom of speech and debate. I warn people how the modern feminist movement is a neo-Marxist ideology rather than a historical continuation of the women's movement. And finally, I believe in sorting your own life out before you try and change the world. But before I go into that, first I'd like to thank Slackbastard for his years and years of anonymously behind a keyboard encouraging young naive people to go to militant protests where they risk injury, hurting other people, and are incited to break the law, risking a criminal conviction. I think it's very brave the way he encourages other people to do that while not doing it himself. It's like, sort of like William Wallace in the movie Braveheart, you know, where he rallies up all the troops.
They may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
Except if he was doing it from a keyboard and wasn't at risk of any personal danger to himself.
They may take
your
lives, but they'll never take
mine.
Freedom!
So, well done, Slackbastard. You're very moral person. Now, the first reason I should be nominated Patriot of the Year is because I have a history of advocating that people be judged by their individual merits and characters rather than their group identity. The far left subscribe to a neo-Marxist worldview. Now, a Marxist worldview splits the world into oppressors or oppressed. You're either an oppressor or an oppressed. Traditionally, Marxism was based on the workers versus the capitalists. Now, the Marxist worldview is that bosses and workers have no symbiotic relationship, and it's only predicated on oppression and exploitation, something that a lot of people disagree with. Now, what's happened in today's world is they've created neo-Marxism, which takes the same oppressor versus oppressed dichotomy and then they racialize it and gender it. So basically it's white people have power over non-white people, and men have power over women, and straight people have power over gay people, and that they're part of the oppressor class, and their privilege is a result of the suffering and disempowerment of the oppressed groups. Now, it is historically true, and I think you can make a case that in a lot of ways in this part of the world, white men on average have had it better. Now, I critique the simplicity of the narrative that the radical left-wingers have of reducing everyone down to their group identity. I think this is wrong, and I made a video because our privileges as human beings go beyond being white and male. For example, I noticed when I was counter-protesting against Reclaim Australia that a lot of people on the far right were missing teeth. Leftists love to say things like, check your privilege. Yeah, good idea, check your privilege. You've got tooth privilege. Okay, do you know how big tooth privilege is in this society? Usually when you smile at people, it reassures them. If you're missing teeth, it freaks them the fuck out. Think about tooth privilege in terms of the economic sphere. You go for a job interview, your resume has the same qualifications as someone who has teeth, and then the job goes to the person with teeth. Another blatant example of tooth privilege in this society. The idea of white privilege is dangerous and encourages people to have a pathological, irrational resentment towards white people. And this is something that I saw when I was involved in the radical left-wing movement several years ago.
I'm paying my loans. I don't have.
Yeah, he's paying his loans.
Yeah, that's nice for you.
We have these things called scholarships. We have.
You're a white ass! You're fucking white male privilege! You're fucking privileged allows you to speak over trans. They can speak over a non-binary trans femme person. They can speak over a non-binary trans femme person, and they can see nothing wrong with it. Because we're tired of being spoken over by fucking white men like that!
All white people are racist. All men are misogynistic. All cisgender people are transphobic. All members of a majority are biased against the members of the minority.
This is why you should vote for me as Patriot of the Year, because it'll give me a platform to articulate why the far left radical identity politics is poisonous. It tells people that they need to resent a certain group because their suffering is caused by the privilege of X group that is oppressing them. Okay? This is why the Nazis started putting Jews in ovens, because they had the belief that the Jews were the cause of their suffering and they needed to be punished so there could be less suffering. Similarly, in many communist countries, they started murdering people for wearing glasses because they believed that that was an indication that that person was of the ruling class or they were rich or whatever, and they were the source of the suffering. Vote for me. Now, the neo-Marxist doctrine doesn't just encourage people to be irrationally resentful towards strangers based on superficial parts of their identity like being male or white, but they also become irrationally sycophantic towards people that they judge to be oppressed. So much so that the radical Islamist group Hizb ut-Tahrir is defended by these radical left-wingers. Here's a video in which I break that down. So at Sydney University, this left-wing ground where they're willing to use violence to shut down dissent and cause a ruckus. They don't believe in free speech, they believe in deplatforming bigotry. These uni students, these left-wingers, went into a uni lecture to protest against some professor who supports Israel, right? Because evidently it's illegal to do that, to have an opinion.
Richard Kemp, you can't hide, you support genocide. Richard Kemp, you can't hide, you support genocide. Richard Kemp, you can't hide, you support genocide. Richard Kemp, you can't hide. We're here to highlight, amongst other things, the absolute disgraceful hypocrisy of this university, which recently banned Hizb ut-Tahrir, an outspoken Islamic organisation that's critical of Australian-American foreign policy.
And they were chanting in defense of a group called Hizb ut-Tahrir, which was invited to speak at Sydney University to debate an atheist. Now, Hizb ut-Tahrir is not your friendly Muslim. They're not the guy who's working down at the kebab shop who gives you a smile and a wink when you order the special hummus, okay? These people are extremists.
Muslims attending were told Australia's democratic government has to go in favour of an Islamic caliphate ruled by Sharia law.
Because you have no state, you have no authority, you have no representation that can be brave. But be brave when we have authority. Come forward when we have a representation with an army ready to defend the honour of Allah and His Messenger. They will not. They will not. And that's...
The Hizb ut-Tahrir is illegal in Indonesia and Bangladesh. Indonesia, the most populous Muslim country in the world. Bangladesh, 96% Muslim. I'm pretty sure they're not Islamophobic. Okay, the mastermind of 9/11 was a member of Hizb ut-Tahrir. That's right, George Bush was a member of Hizb. No, I'm joking, it was the other guy. I advocate against ideology. I think ideologies are incredibly seductive. Ideas like communism and Nazism give people certainty, and people crave certainty. These ideologies explain the world as it is with one causal explanation. So if you're a communist, all the suffering in the world and all phenomena is based on oppression. If you're a neo-Nazi or a Nazi, all the suffering in the world is blamed on the Jews. And I think it's a temptation to want to see the world in such a simple terms because we're lazy creatures and it makes it easy for us. Secondly, perceiving ourselves as victims is a temptation because it abdicates us of responsibility. We don't have to try. The whole world is against us and I'm a victim and it's not my fault. This is a temptation. It's so good not to have responsibility for your own life, to just blame the Jews. Like I was talking way ideology works is we have our core narrative of reality, and then we explain everything based on that core narrative so it fits in. So, for example, this is the reason why fundamentalist Christians are more likely to report seeing Jesus' face in burnt toast than an atheist is going to report seeing Charles Darwin's face in burnt toast, because the Christian has the expectation to see that because they have a core belief that miracles are real. Similarly, if you're a radical left-winger, you're going to explain the world through your ideological lens. That's why they have this thing called microaggressions.
Microaggressions, which are usually unintended racial slights towards a person of a different race. If you have never experienced a microaggression or considered yourself a perpetrator, then you're probably white, although everyone is capable of the act. But we're not just talking about race.
They can be based on race, but they're usually based on intersections of different social locations: race, class, gender, immigration status, phenotype.
If a person who is white is asking a non-white person where they're really from, the only possible motivation is malevolent racism. There's no other possible explanation. There's one causal principle: everything is predicated on oppression. Okay? When in reality, I'm pretty sure that the 40-year-old Cheryl working in the tuck shop with some African immigrant refugee chick in some poor suburb who turns to her and goes, "Oh, where are you from?" It's not necessarily malevolence. In fact, some mixed racial children, their parents might have had a conversation like that in the first 30 minutes of meeting each other. Okay, but when you're an ideologue, everything has one causal explanation, and you don't look for other explanations because that requires thinking, and thinking is hard work. Why think when I can fall back on the comfort of my lazy, stupid, pathological ideology? But once you become an ideologue, like I was, it's incredibly hard to get out because everything you see is kind of like evidence for your ideology being true, because you're interpreting everything through that, and you go, "Oh, well, that's happening because of racism. I see racism now." Or you'll cherry pick your worldview. So you'll see one video of a racist dude being racist on a train, and then you'll go, "Look, we live in a racist society that's racist everywhere." But that's confirmation bias, because no one's sharing around the viral video of the white dude not being a racist on a bus. No one's like, "Oh, come have a look at this, Jeffrey. Yeah, check it out. He's just sitting there not being racist. Oh my God, fuck, I'm going to share that and tag all my friends." So there's a thing called the Ash experiment. So as human beings, we look to our peers because we can't know all the information, and we have to defer to the group for some information. This is how humans operate, okay? I have to know that there's a tiger in the bushes, and I have to take Gary's word for it, right? But this can also be a weakness, a human weakness. Now, we like to conform, and we'll trust the group over our own perceptions. So there's a thing called the Ash experiment, the most famous experiment in group conformity. They get a whole bunch of people, to about 10, 9 of them are actors, one of them is the subject that the experiment is actually on. They have a scientist lead the class and show them a placard of black columns of clearly different lengths, 3 of them usually on a clear white placard, and the numbered 1 to 3, and the scientist will ask the group to say what is the biggest column, and the actors will say that the second longest one is the longest. About 75% of the time the subject will go along with the group because they'll trust the group's perception over their own. Now, when you're also your friendship and peer group and university climate and your Facebook feed is all saying the same fucking shit, that we're living in a white supremacist, homophobic, totalitarian nightmare here in Australia, then you're going to start believing that. And that's what happened to me, and that's why ideology is so poisonous. And then once you're in an ideological clique and that becomes your friendship group, it's so hard to see beyond that. It's like the water being sucked through a tiny little hole, and then the pressures of the water is keeping you there. As it's sucking you in, it sucks you down, and you stay there as an ideologue. And it's a fucking... There's a reason why the Holocaust happened, and it's got to do with these things. And this is why me articulating these things like I have been is why I should be voted Patriot of the Year. here are some murals inside of an anarchist squat. Here you see a police car on fire. They only see police as a corrupt entity. They don't have a balanced view of them. Yes, sometimes police are corrupt. And here's another image where it queers the oppressed victim group that are virtuous against all these oppressive structures. So this is their constant ash experiment. These are very typical of many of the squats because they only last a few months. This is the kind of shit they see and dine on mentally every day. Reason number 4 why I should be voted Patriot of the Year: I am for debate and for freedom of speech and democracy, as opposed to what Antifa is for, which is totalitarianism, violence, the threat of violence and censorship in order to stifle opinions they disagree with. Antifa doesn't just attack radical right-wingers, they also attacked moderate right-wingers. This is a clip of them attacking Andrew Bolt on the street. Now, Andrew Bolt is a moderate right-winger with a pretty normal conservative views. There's a lot of people who think like them in this society. He's an avatar for tens of thousands of people. Now, what are these Antifa loons saying? It's okay to assault tens of thousands of the Australian citizens? It's mindless. It's a garbage premise. And not only that, their tactic of so-called shutting down the far right, there's no evidence that anything they've done has done anything other than to empower the far right by giving them free media and giving them something to rally against, right? As well as showing to the general public how viciously violent and disgusting a lot of the ideas associated on the far left are, which damages a lot of people on the center left and their cause. It's disgusting. Disgusting. Now, I'll give you a classic example. There was a 10th anniversary event for the Cronulla riots where a few radical right-wingers wanted to go down and celebrate the Cronulla riots because they have some narrative that it was a righteous rebellion, okay? The council and the government didn't want them there. They dragged them through the courts, and then they finally decided that they were allowed to have a barbecue and not a rally, but they were kept way off in the distance, away from the public, alright? It was like 12 bogans having a barbecue. But the radical left-wingers got all hysterical, and there was about 150 of them turned up on this day for this event. They turned up at the train station, all masked up like vegan ISIS, and they marched through the beach, where at the beach there was all kinds of people from ethnic backgrounds playing peacefully at this fucking beach, while these vegan ISIS stormed through with these militant banners saying death to fascists and assaulting camera people who were interested because, yeah, it's so unfair for a journalist to want to film and report 100 people marching down the street and screaming militantly. And then they march up, and then the police have to spend thousands of taxpayers' dollars to cordon off these lunatics from going and murdering some right-wingers. And then what happens? There's like an odd right-winger who gets caught there, and they knock him over, and then on the fucking newspaper they had a picture of the Antifa Sydney cult members standing over some 50-year-old, right? Like, that. How does that do anything other than to, one, promote the radical right wing when they weren't going to get attention otherwise? Secondly, shit all over the fucking reality of the Cronulla riots and take the narrative onto your own little agenda. You don't give a fuck about the actual people there. None of the people who got assaulted on that day were involved in any of that, right? There was no community engagement. When I was a member of this cult, I advocated for them to go and have a music event that night, try and get 300 people for a great music event. That's what would have won. But instead, the cult is obsessed with violence and smashing the fascists. That's all they want to do. And that's what happened. Reason number 4 why you should vote for me is because I expose modern feminism as having nothing to do with the historical women's movement, but being a thing that has been co-opted by neo-Marxist ideologues. Intersectional feminism is neo-Marxism. The intersection of race, gender and class is this modern neo-Marxist ideology coming out. And because people love women and they want to help them, it's a very seductive ideology. And obviously there are some women who cop shit from men in their life, and that's a problem. But that doesn't mean that the full neo-Marxist doctrine is the solution to the problem. Okay? And if you disagree with any one part of this doctrine, then you're a bad person who hates women. I recently made a video in which I articulate why word policing wasn't such a great move. I saw this coaster which was really interesting. What it says is, it says, myth, there's nothing wrong with a sexist joke. And in big letters, fact, sexist jokes are a reflection of sexist attitudes. Gender stereotypes underpins violence against women. I felt this was interesting that it was printed on a coaster. Do you know what a coaster underpins? Alcohol. Do you think alcohol might be a bigger factor in domestic violence than sexist jokes? So right now there's a big popularity with the feminist movement speaking around domestic violence. Now with the neo-Marxist intersectional feminist analysis, the problem is the patriarchy. And like I was saying before, everything hooks into this core central narrative of oppressor versus oppressed and the oppressive patriarchy. I think there could be other things that we could look at if we want to address domestic violence. Why we have cigarette warnings on cigarette packets that are over the top. Why don't we have that on alcohol? Wouldn't alcohol also be a big factor in domestic violence? Also, the narrative around domestic violence, the majority of the time where one spouse is being abused and the spouse isn't fighting back, the majority of the time the perpetrator is a woman. Okay, that is lost from the feminist narrative. That isn't talked about. The majority of the time when children are physically abused, that's domestic violence. The perpetrator is the mother. Okay, maybe a son who is abused by his mum is more likely to grow up to abuse his female partners. Okay, maybe the problem and the situation is a lot more complicated than sitting there going, men. Okay, that doesn't mean I hate women. I think the intersectional feminist movement that has dominated feminism has done a lot to mislead people, and they've become avatars for dead philosophers they haven't read. I also disagree with the feminist narrative that we live in an oppressive rape culture. Now it is true that sometimes people are sexually assaulted and that person will be in a position of power, and people won't want to believe that is true. Okay, and they extrapolate and they make that a universal. Now, I had to endure a false rape accusation from one of these people in this Antifa group, this anarchist subculture that I used to be part of. What happened is I went out with her, then I broke up with her, I went to Brisbane, I came back to Sydney, and I found out she was telling people that I raped her. This caused me absolute mental devastation. I ended up going back to Brisbane, communicating with her online. We met in Byron Bay, spent 2 weeks together. We ended up going out another year. She went to my family home, I went to her family home. I was welcomed by her sibling that she used to occasionally live with, and she even organised a threesome between me and her ex-girlfriend. Now, because that's what you do, is if you were raped by someone, you get back with them and you organise a threesome. There's nothing like, yeah, no, that doesn't happen. And then furthermore, I was with her for a year, and then she wanted me to go to the UK. This is a photo of me and her at the airport. You know that classic cliche movie scene where the rapist is running, saying goodbye to their rape victim? Or the rape victim is crying and wants to be in the loving arms of their rapist? No, it doesn't happen. It's ridiculous, right? But with the radical left-wingers, because it's usually a youth-based movement, they're very naive about the human nature, right? They don't understand this malevolence, and because of the oppressor dichotomy, it's like in the capitalist phrase, the customer is always right. For the radical left-wingers, it's the victim is always right. This is a video of me with Antifa Sydney protesting against the radical right. In the same video, you can also see the woman who falsely accused me of rape. A link for it will be in the description of this video. This is a photo of her peer group. Okay, they're protesting about the rape culture that exists at Sydney University. Now, this is strange that there's a rape epidemic going on at Sydney University. They're holding up mattresses because there was a high-profile person at, I think, Yale University that would carry around a mattress from class to class in order to demonstrate the burden of being raped and not believed, right? Now, the person she alleged raped her, it turns out he had text messages of her after the fact that she was alleged to be raped, of asking this person to sleep with them again, and it went to court years later. He won. and she also would do a whole bunch of weird art performances where she was stringing herself up, and she even made a video reenactment of the rape scene. Now, unfortunately, I have a close family member who was raped. She was drugged, and three men had their way with her, okay, where she was in and out of consciousness. She didn't tell anyone for 30 years, and she didn't go about making a fucking reenactment video of it, right? I think that maybe that this mattress girl is a fucking liar, right, who's milking sympathy to feed her warped, damaged ego. Now, the radical left-wingers, because they have such a pathetic understanding of human nature and such a shallow, goofy interpretation of society that you could teach a chimp in one day, they automatically... Look, let's just say that reality is a lot more complex, okay? Furthermore, this is how the cult I used to be part of would handle what they would call a rape, right? They would have a DIY rape process, okay? Could you imagine that? A bunch of people on the dole who identify as anarchists organizing and mediating between someone who's a rape victim and a rapist, and somehow that's better than the existing institutions in our society. These are the people who apparently take this issue seriously, and it's also dangerous the way that they redefine what rape is, okay? Here's one such image, okay? So if two people have been drinking, they have sex, and it was rape because the man is part of the oppressor class and the woman is part of the oppressed class. She's abdicated of any individual responsibility, and she's not equal to a man in the responsibility she has as a human being, and she was automatically raped. Now, how many people watching this video have had sex with someone that they've met, had a one-night stand with both parties, or somewhat intoxicated? Well, congratulations, you are all raping each other now. Thank you, radical left-wingers. You're brilliant. You're contributing so much to society. I believe in individual responsibility, not telling others how to live. Now, when I was a far left-wing ideologue, I used to shame other people for the words that they said, rather than focusing on my own behaviour. You know, because I took what Gandhi said. You know, remember how Gandhi, he said, shame others into being the change you want to see in the world. That's how you make a better world. You don't try and change yourself, you change others. You know, remember what Jesus said? He said, those without sins write the first blog, okay? I believe in individual responsibility. I feel that political activism is a form of spiritual procrastination. For example, far right-wing video blogger Sherman Burgess, aka the Aussie Patriot, would advocate things like, he would say things like, how come they're looking after the fucking refugees and they're not looking after the homeless? What about the homeless in Australia? Now, not a completely irrational talking point, but not a very original one. Now, the reason I take issue with that is because it's been alleged by multiple sources that this is a man who has multiple children to multiple women. Now, I don't know, call me crazy, but maybe you could take that moral principle of looking after home before looking after other people and worrying about other people and apply that to your own life. Ooh. See, this was my issue when I was a radical left-winger. I couldn't structure my own fucking life, okay? My room was a mess. I couldn't budget my own money properly, okay? I would spend my money on alcohol, and then I would sit around advocating how the economy should be restructured, right? Like, it's very easy to do that, okay? We've all had our New Year's resolutions where I'm going to quit smoking, and people will pat you on the back for, oh, well done, oh, you're so brave, Susan. And then 2 weeks later, they're like, oh, Susan, how's the smoking going? Oh, shut up, don't fucking look at me, get out of here! Right? And that's because it's so much easier to advocate for some utopian ideal than to actually achieve it, okay? All these people who go, oh, Malcolm Turnbull, he's selling us out to the Chinese. He's wrong, that Malcolm. And then that same dude would go play the poker machines and spend their own money in the poker machines, right? Selling themselves out for no real gain because it's easier. Like, yeah, Malcolm Turnbull's corrupt, of course he is, because you're fucking corrupt, okay? The Marxist dichotomy of oppressor versus oppressed is wrong, okay? The actual reality is that everyone is a piece of shit, And some people are more capable of doing it than others, okay? And there's a small number of us who's keeping this whole fucking thing afloat because they're not corrupt pieces of shit and they look after their own life, okay? The path to a higher morality isn't by holding a sign on the street telling others what to do, okay? Like, we've all met that person who's really into the Palestine-Israel conflict. Okay, I knew this like middle-aged woman who was like, it's wrong what they're doing. It's wrong, you know, or, you know, all these other people who advocate that. And it's like, really? Is that the biggest problem in your life? Israel, Palestine? Do you know what I mean? What about the conflict between you and your other family members, okay? You know what? There's no fucking group or cause or activism thing that are holding up a sign saying, yes, Sharon, end the conflict between you and your brother. Do it now. You know, there's no one telling you to be a good person, but there's no shortage of stupid cults that will validate you for having some stupid position. That you know, like, it's so easy to go, oh, you know what? I think there should be peace in the Middle East. Yeah, I'm a good person. Oh, I'm so moral. Yeah, you know what? I think Trump's a bit of a bad man. Yeah. Yeah, good me. Good me. You know what I mean? Is it really about the Israel-Palestine thing? Is that really the problem? Is that the big thing in your life? Or is that just a way to procrastinate on your own family issues? Is that what's going on? Do you know what I mean? Because you listen to what these people say. They go, oh, you know, Israel, Palestine. Israel used to call, you know, bomb Palestine. They take away their land. And when Palestine was 7, Israel used to call them faggot in front of their friends. You know? It's spiritual procrastination. Because, okay, think about how hard it is to regulate your own behavior and the ways you'll lie in your own head. Okay, when you procrastinate from something, okay, you have an important task to do, you will bullshit yourself that there's something more important, like taking out the bins or having a shower or making dinner or whatever, right? Similarly, I think the same process happens with political activism. Okay, why should I worry about looking after my family and regulating my own life when nuclear war could happen? I need to stop nuclear war. I'm changing my profile picture. I'm clicking like. Okay, it's about instant gratification and being a lazy shithead. Okay. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it and consider voting for me in this stupid poll. I thank you for your time. I hope this has broadened your understanding of how pathological the radical left wing can be. I'd also like to thank psychologist and lecturer Jordan Peterson for broadening my understanding of everything considerably. There hasn't been a thinker that's had a more positive impact on my life. I also recommend people check out a guy called Jonathan Haidt, who does a lot of research about moral psychology and is a fantastic speaker about what he's researched.
Once you see this operating, once you see groups circling around their sacred values, what you'll also see is them going blind to anything that contradicts those values.
And I would also like to thank David Hazowitz, who is a former radical left-winger. In fact, he was the most influential far-left writer during the New Left era, which was the 1960s, 70s anti-Vietnam protest radical student movement. He was a massive writer for the radical left back then, and he witnessed the Black Panthers murder someone he helped recruit into the radical left. Listening to his interviews has done a lot to help me understanding my own predicament.
And human beings are prone to evil, where the corruption is within us. Once you understand that, you're a conservative. That's it.
I also have a few interviews of other far left wingers on my Facebook and YouTube channel, and in the next year I look forward to doing a lot more interviews with other ex-cult members. Thank you so much for watching.
A close reading of 20th century history indicates, as nothing else can, the horrors that accompany loss of faith in the idea of the individual. It is only the individual, after all, who suffers. The group does not suffer. Only those who compose it Thus, the reality of the individual must be regarded as primary. If suffering is to be regarded seriously,